Hello everybody and welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown podcast. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Umir, who's a professional football scout and analyst, and we're here to preview the two Champions League semi-finals. Right, feels like a long time we've not done a sit-down pod, but I just want to get your initial thoughts on kind of the Champions League quarterfinals and how they went, and maybe who surprised you the most, who was the most impressive in them rounds. Because I think, before we get into it, Arsenal, PSG, Barcelona-Inter are like two very different games, but very similar at the same time. I want you to ask you about the four teams who were in it, who's impressed you the most, and what have you made of the Champions League in itself? Which it's been really good.
Yeah, the format's been really interesting. I think it's quite telling actually that I think second, third, fourth from the league format itself. All in the semi-finals. Obviously, Liverpool the only team that aren't, and PSG were the team that beat them to progress anyway. So I think the format's been really good. I think the teams actually, their styles are very different. You look at all four teams. I think that's what's made it really interesting. And even in the quarterfinals, I think the variety in style has made the Champions League feel more interesting than, for example, the Premier League, which feels like a lot of similar styles and sort of similar sort of storylines. Whereas you're looking at Inter Milan with their interpretation of the five at the back or three at the back, that becomes this four at the back at times. You're looking at Barcelona with their like intricate link play, but also their ability to go direct, but the ability to play sort of more build-up play. Arsenal, like the very pragmatic side who like
look like a Champions League team.
They look exactly like a Champions League side. And then obviously you've got PSG, who arguably look like the best attacking side in terms of their individual quality, particularly in the wings, particularly with Dembele hitting that form at the moment, and they're brilliant at pressing as well. So I think that the variety in styles is what I'm really excited about, and we've seen that all the way throughout the competition, in the knockout stage especially.
Yeah, because I wanted to just touch on there. I've got some data. So obviously, team goals scored in the Champions League this season: Barcelona on 37, with Arsenal, PSG tied on 30, and Inter Milan on 19. Which is funny because Inter Milan are the least highest scoring out of the four by they're not even close. Yeah. But they've also only conceded 5 goals in the Champions League this year, which is the least of anyone.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
And that is like a proper Champions League side, and I am gonna throw it onto Arsenal.
So what is it,
PSG.
the best attack versus the best defence?
Yeah. So that's something in itself. Yeah. But I wanted to focus on Arsenal PSG first, and it's interesting because we were just talking then off camera how in La Liga and Serie A everything's to play for. Now in this game, Arsenal PSG have obviously won the Liga and title. And I watched them against Le Havre at the weekend, and they played two 18-year-olds. I think one 17, one 18. So it's very clear that they're sort of saving their biggest hitters. How do you see this game going? Because obviously they played them at the Emirates, and they beat them. Yeah. And I think that was just before PSG started to knock everyone away. What do you make of this matchup? It's a very good one, but what do you make of it?
Well, in that game as well, like PSG still had kind of the hallmarks of an Enrique side. Like you kind of saw the blueprint of what they were trying to do, and it wasn't the most perfect execution of that, but there were still kind of good signs in what they were trying to do. But I don't know. It's difficult when you look at Arsenal. I've said this numerous times, but they're the best team at not getting beat for me. Very pragmatic side, and you look at their midfielders now, and Declan Rice coming off of the back of this incredible form, but Marino as well, who's this midfielder, striker kind of player. Odegaard, who's had his fair share of critics this season, but his pressing quality, second to none. Like he leads the press for Arsenal in a way where I don't think he's droppable. And then obviously your wingers still have that same kind of quality. So I think PSG, they've been generally really good, but at times when you've got a really astute defensive block, there are some questions that they need to answer. Against Aston Villa, I thought they did answer them well over the course of the 2 legs, but in that first leg especially, I think they did struggle at times to kind of get at Aston Villa, and it was only when either they enticed Aston Villa to push upon them before attacking the space in behind, or when Aston Villa went to chase the game and their set defence wasn't as strong, that PSG managed to get some better opportunities to score. And they've got brilliant individual quality to showcase, but Arsenal have both. They can press brilliantly and they can sit in brilliantly.
I think it was the first frailty we probably seen of PSG, and obviously in the knockouts when when Villa got on top. And I think a lot of people have made out that, you know, this midfield of Fabian Ruiz, Vitinha, João Neves, stuff like that, like, can it compete on the biggest stages in these games? And I think the biggest thing I'd probably say about PSG is when the game does get in a frantic way, you can find, you know, spaces and gaps and stuff to open. The problem I find is that Arsenal don't have the same transitional quality that an Aston Villa do. In terms of when they're running out with like Morgan, Rodgers, Watkins, Rashford, Asensio. I don't think...
Is Havertz on the cards?
No, I don't think so. No, I think he's completely out, which is obviously, in of itself, he's scored 4 goals in the Champions League for Arsenal, only Saka's got more. And I do think he was instrumental in the game against PSG the first time round.
Top transitional threat as
well. So I just, in my opinion, I'm just a bit concerned whether or not Arsenal will have enough... It's really hard to rule them out because they play at the Emirates the first game, and I think the biggest thing for me when looking at semi-finals, I'm obviously looking at the Europa Leagues as well, is that if a team is playing at home in the second leg, I always feel like there's a momentum switch pending, just it's there and it's going to happen. So obviously Arsenal have got the game at the Emirates first, and then PSG play at home, and I feel like Arsenal, I believe, have to probably go into the game in PSG about 1-2-0 up. Because,
and even if you're up, I think the second leg being at your ground gives you a better chance of making that comeback.
The only thing I will say, well, one of the things I would say about Arsenal in terms of if they were to go into the game in France with a leading game state, one of the problems that I've noticed with PSG is when they're playing a deep block, and because they don't have a traditional number 9 and because they play Dembele there, they don't really have anyone occupying the box like well enough in terms of like a brute force goal scorer. And I think like if you look at Arsenal, the way they're defending, the amount of, you know, big lads in the box and how compact they are, I feel like you might see something similar to the Liverpool game where they've kind of got no one pushing the centre halves deep, and they do create chances, but have they got the reliable quality to take them chances? Obviously, Ousmane Dembele.
It's the same with the Real Madrid and Arsenal game.
Yeah,
it's the second leg, like they gave the onus to Madrid to kind of break them down, and we didn't really see much besides from.
And they don't have like a recognised number 9 as well. Do you know what I mean? Exactly. Everything's kind of in front of the block rather than inside the block. And I think it's one of the criticisms that it's the trade-off we've often spoke about, which is if you play a traditional number 9 like a Gonzalo Ramos that they have, then you lose kind of the fluidity that Ousmane Dembele gives you. And
also Dembele's ability to press is brilliant as well. I think people are, you know, it's one quality that he's brought to this PSG side that people are not talking about enough. You know, I think you make a great point in terms of if Arsenal need to go out and kind of make that first leg a decent win to the point where they can kind of sit in. Similar to how they did against Real Madrid, I think that's a great kind of blueprint to follow. And I do think, if you've got a team like Arsenal with a lead, a substantial lead, and they have to defend it, I think it's very, very difficult. I can't think of any team that I think I'd confidently say could break that down in world football.
And that's the thing that I think about Arsenal now. And when they played Real Madrid in the second leg, I think a lot of people were expecting Arsenal to, for some reason, like sit deep and only have like 30% of the ball and stuff like that. But when we watch Arsenal now, because Real Madrid don't reliably press from the front, which is what PSG do well, is like PSG are going to press them high, so they're going to potentially struggle in deep build-up, and Arsenal are really, really fluid in deep build-up. Obviously, Jakub Kyrgios there instead of Gabriel, players like that. I'm not sure, and obviously Thomas Partey suspended for the first leg as well, so obviously they're going to be missing their natural holding midfielder. So it's going to be like, Real Madrid didn't press Arsenal as high as they wanted to because they just physically don't have the...
And also, when they did score, it was actually Vinicius pressing Saliba on the blind side.
So it's like PSG are going to do all the reliable stuff that Real Madrid couldn't do, even if Arsenal are winning in the game. Because I think a lot of the defending from Arsenal against Madrid is deceptive because they're having the ball and they're still trying to play, which is obviously something we've, praised City for, kind of taking the ball in a winning game state and then, using that to defend. And I think if Arsenal go in leading into France, then I think they will face a different sort of challenge, which is PSG are going to be right up against them. And I think we saw that in the Liverpool game where Liverpool went long at pretty much every opportunity directly into Salah. So obviously Arsenal can go long, and I think maybe that is a way to get at PSG. But
more than anything, it's a way to relieve that pressure. I thought actually against Real Madrid, there was maybe a 10-15 minute stint where Real Madrid actually did pen Arsenal in fairly well, and we actually saw Bukayo Saka move off of that wing and move more centrally, and he almost played like this hold-up attacker, and it was incredible. He was outball. The ball came out into his chest, he took it on his chest, and he drew the foul, and that's very like accomplished, astute, like veteran number 9 play, and Bukayo Saka did that. If Havertz is in the side, he does it brilliantly, and obviously we don't think he'll be in the side because of his injury, but Marino perhaps. But then in my head, I think with Partey out, if you push Marino up there, who's that third?
Who's going to be the third one? And that's going to be a problem for Arsenal, I think, because I think when we're talking about them playing out, I think naturally you want to put Declan Rice as the sitter. Yeah. But he's had his best games in the Champions League, playing as a bit of a higher player. Yeah. And I don't think, I'm not sure about Jorginho's availability. I'm not sure what's going on there.
He has played recently, but in a big stretch Champions League game, would I trust Jorginho to play in as a number 6?
Especially when they want to overpower PSG's midfield. Yeah. If you're enjoying the video and want more tactical analysis and podcasts, please press the subscribe button below and hit the bell to enable post notifications. There's so many conversations to talk about this game because it's just one of them games where it's like two contrasting styles a little bit, but in terms of how they play, and sort of PSG are quite a small team, Arsenal a big team.
But I think that actually makes a big difference in Arsenal's chances, I think, in the competition in general. Because if you've got a team like PSG, if they're given the challenge of breaking down a stubborn low block defence, and you've got a lot of the ball and you've got a lot of quality, I don't think they have the individuals to cross the ball in and get a header. And secondarily, when you look at Arsenal against Real Madrid in that first leg, they scored 2 free kicks. And aside from the free kicks, although they were attacking fairly well, it required those set pieces to push them over the edge. And obviously, in that situation, it's pure ball striking quality. But in the same instance, they've got the quality from corners to give them 1 or 2 goals in very tight games. Whereas, do PSG necessarily have that quality? I'm not 100% sure. Obviously, they've got good centre backs in the air who can maybe provide a headed goal. But in general, in knockout competition, you need these very fine margin gains. If you've got a set block, you've got a set shape, and you've got a set challenge that is very hard to kind of take advantage of, can you score a free kick? Can you get a headed goal off of a set piece or a corner routine?
Like a scruffy goal. Yeah. Like Arsenal are more capable of scoring a scruffy goal than PSG.
Yeah, they can score more goals from
different situations.
From dead ball situations, I think, more than anything. And can you draw a penalty? That's probably the other thing that I'd mention. And you can draw a penalty if you win your free kicks, if you score headed goals. These are all, because it's a very low scoring sport.
It's a very low scoring sport, and I think Arsenal have sort of built a team that can play on margins a lot better than PSG. And I think obviously if the game is always going to be at a level game state, I think it's going to probably bend Arsenal's way, just because if they get a free kick on the edge of the box or if they get a corner, you kind of fancy them half the time to at least get something out of it. Yeah. I think something that's really interesting about the game is obviously something we mentioned at the top, just before we move on to the next one, is that they both have nothing to play for, and you actually said that could work in against the game in terms of the watchability of the game. Yeah. Because if they're both preparing for this game and they're not in the flow state of, playing games, we're going to talk about Barca and Inter next, who have like ridiculous schedules in terms of when they're playing the games and the title races. These two have got the complete opposite. And I'm not sure whether or not that's going to be a good thing or a bad thing for the game. Because
I think Arteta will be super aware of that, because he's been at Manchester City, especially in the run-in. Yeah. And in those games, I was often surprised that Guardiola would pick a fairly strong squad, knowing that we had another big game coming up not too long after that. But the idea is keep your rhythm, keep that momentum going, keep players playing in a way where they understand the other players that are around them. And I think the Ipswich game, obviously, players were rotated.
Pretty similar 11.
Yeah. But they still brought those players in. Saka still had a decent amount of minutes whilst being protected. Trossard obviously came in, who wasn't involved in the other games. But it wasn't a massive overhaul. You're still trying to keep some of that rhythm going. And I think that's a challenge that both managers will face going into that semi-final.
Who would you fancy for PSG Arsenal?
I would go Arsenal. Yeah. I'd go Arsenal, but I think if Arsenal in that first leg are trying to dominate the ball and trying to dominate possession in attacking PSG more heavily, I do think there's opportunity for PSG to hit them on the counter.
Yeah.
If Arsenal have that first leg with a 1 or 2 goal margin and they go to the second leg and sit in, I think PSG will struggle to break them.
Yeah.
I don't think PSG necessarily have the quality to repeatedly break down a set Arsenal defence.
Yeah.
But I do think that PSG can hit them on the counter and score a few goals. So the first leg, I think, determines the tie.
I was going to say the first goal determines the tie, because I think if Arsenal score first,
they can kind of sit in
I just can't imagine the same problems what I had kind of with PSG, even in the Villa game actually, as well as the Liverpool game. It's just they do everything between the boxes really well, and they get to the final third and they do create chances. But the lack of a big man in the box, the lack of someone who can.
But they get a lot of their chances edge here. I think you can kind of cut in and get shots out.
They don't generate like 1v1s. It's really weird. Like they have these moments where someone beats a man in the box and then they shoot. There's always like a bit between, rather than where Arsenal you could just swing a ball in and you can get something on the end. I don't think PSG like have that. But I will.
But PSG can get a shot away out of nothing.
Just for the fun of it, I'll say PSG.
So one of us will be right.
Yeah. I'll say PSG simply because I think if Arsenal hold the ball like you were saying, I think Arsenal are going to try and hold the ball more than they're going to try and sit deep, especially if they're leading. And I think PSG can force errors out of maybe like Jakub Kiwior, for example, who's a bit more of a unusual starter.
And they're really good at playing out of pressure. Arsenal are brilliant at pressing, like we've mentioned, they play in these sort of small spaces and then hit a long switch, and then suddenly you've got 2 or 3 running in. And whether or not they sort of entice pressure on their left side and then play a switch and go at Kiwior, I think that's a very viable solution. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting game. It's exciting. I do think Arsenal generally have quite a well-rounded team built for the Champions League, though.
If I was going to say one to watch, I'd honestly say Nuno Mendes.
Yeah.
I think
I'd love to see
best left back in the world.
Kvaratskhelia against Timber, though.
Yeah.
Because Timber is a really lockdown defender, and Kvaratskhelia 1v1. I've not seen many get the better of him.
Because only Dembele scored more goals than Mendes in the Champions League for PSG,
oh, really?
Which is crazy.
Wow, yeah.
For a left back.
Yeah.
But he is insane. We're going to move on now into Barcelona-Inter Milan, which is a crazy game.
I need to sit down and properly visualise what might happen with this game, because style-wise,
there's too much going on here.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Like they both do like a million things. Yeah. You know what I mean?
So for anyone who doesn't know, obviously Barcelona are currently in the La Liga title race at the time of recording, and obviously this might change, but they're 4 points clear of Barcelona, but they're running of fixtures.
Oh, Real Madrid.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Sorry, Real Madrid. Their run of fixtures leading up to the Inter game and around the Inter game is obviously Real Madrid in the Copa del Rey final, the first leg against Inter, then Valladolid, then Inter Milan again in the second leg, and then Real Madrid again. So, and obviously to put that into comparisons for Inter Milan are tied on points at the top of the league with Napoli after 33 games played. So that is neck and neck. And at the time of recording again, Inter Milan's next 5 games are Roma, Barcelona, Verona, Barcelona, Torino. And they obviously have must-win league games. It doesn't really matter who they're against, the league games, they have to win them.
Equal on points.
So obviously they'll be going for it. And it's probably going to be, hopefully, one of the games of the season, I reckon. Because as you just said there, the sort of the contrasting style between the two teams is quite amazing.
Yeah.
And as we mentioned, it's the top scorers against the best defensive team. But yeah, what do you make of this game? Because I'm going to be honest, I've kind of wanted to speak about Inzaghi quite a lot over this season.
I just kind of wanted to let you reel off your Inter praise.
So
the thing is, they don't play like any other.
No.
Leverkusen, you've got elements.
Yeah.
But like they don't play like anybody else. And people look at Inzaghi's Inter and say, "Oh, but look, a 5 at the back. Look how good it is."
Bastoni stands up front. It's not.
Yeah, their wide centre backs press all the way in and become one of the front 2 with their 9 if the ball gets switched to the other side, and then they're defending in a 4-4-2 with your right centre back all the way in the front two. That's not normal. It's brilliant.
He's quite a revolutionary coach, and he's always had this thing in Italy of being kind of the knockout coach. Like he's unbelievable in knockout tournaments. I remember him winning the Coppa Italia when he was at Lazio, and he's just kind of had that repertoire of being this just a knockout manager. And when you think of Inter Milan, you do generally think of him as a knockout team, somewhere that's hard to go to. San Siro, you think of Mourinho, and I think Inzaghi is one of these coaches who's kind of developed into, like, year by year he introduces something completely different, and it's just selfishly as a United fan, I'm watching Ruben Amorim play a similar sort of system, and then I'm watching Inter, and I know he's been there for a long time, but the tweaks that he's made in the past few seasons, like, for example, as we were just talking there, they do obviously make a lopsided build-up. They never build in a 3, really. They always involve the keeper, and one of the wing-backs plays as a winger, so it's basically a 4-2-4. But some of the centre-halves, like, actually go and stand up front, like, when they've got the ball, and it's really weird.
And not just statically, they'll move, like, in a maybe three players are rotating between themselves, and your centre-back ends up in strike, and your striker ends up in midfield, and your midfielder ends up out wide. And
and then you've got this idea that they're, like, a really fluid positional team, and they play with the ball in, like, all phases, but then you also combine that fluidity, and obviously they can score in multiple ways. Lautaro Martinez's goal, honestly, in the Allianz, actually, in the first leg, not even in the second leg, but he has been brilliant, ridiculous, just end to end, both boxes. They can go long, they can play short, they've got power in the team.
Their rotations mean that if you try and press them, they're one of the best teams at getting out of that pressure. Despite being, when you think of a defensive team, you don't think of
them doing this. Kind of similar to Arsenal, actually.
I was going to say they're reducing of like fine margins and variance and things like that. Like, they play in a way where they're very hard to break down, and they've got a lot of players like in areas that maximise their quality. They're quite physical in general. I do see that. Obviously, completely different systems, but I see that sort of comparison. One
of the things I will say about this Inter Milan team is, obviously I watched them away at Bologna, and Bologna are incredible as well, by the way, this season. They're fourth at the time of recording, and they beat them in the 94th minute, Orsolini goal. And I watched it, and Inter Milan look knackered. Like, they are really, really, like, trying to get over the line, and the squad depth in the squad to say they're going into this title race is not good. Like, they are bringing on like very suboptimal players. I'm not gonna dig out the players too much, but the squad's very thin for the amount of competitions they're still in.
Just on that point, as a Manchester City fan, like, one thing that I've learned through watching Guardiola teams is how do you balance the side, and how do you manage the running, essentially. And one thing I've noted watching Klopp sides and Pep sides is, with Klopp sides, they used to play on this chemistry between players. Now, when you look at Inzaghi's Inter Milan, he's been there a long time. A lot of the core have been there a long time as well. So in these rotations and in the chemistry between the players, they know exactly how it works because they've played with each other a lot. And when you've got a team that's based on this associative, like, chemistry between the players, when you take a player out, the levels drop massively. Do you understand what I'm saying? So you almost,
because they're so used to playing next to them.
They're used to play with that certain player. And those players almost have this kind of innate understanding of where each other are going to move. Now, that worked really well with Klopp's Liverpool, but then when Firmino left, for example,
and someone got injured
someone got injured, you noted it more sort of obviously. The same with Inter Milan. I'm worried that, like you're mentioning, because they kind of have to play with the same players to get that maximum quality out of the system. If someone gets injured, or if you have to take someone out for minutes, you might lose the league, you might get knocked out in the semi-final, and suddenly it's not as impressive a season as is on the cards, essentially. So that idea of kind of associative play and playing on that as a tool for maximising your team's quality, as good as it can be, has its downfalls in squad makeup and injuries and the running for seasons. I just think that's an interesting point to touch on.
Yeah, obviously Lautaro Martinez has got 8 goals for Inter Milan in the Champions League this season, so he's actually scored 8 of their 19 goals, which is obviously incredible. And he's been one of them players. I remember watching him in the World Cup. He's had this kind of tagline that when the big moment comes, he misses the big chances. And I think like if
whenever
the
world's
actually watching him, he struggles. But obviously the Bayern Munich tie kind of flipped that narrative on its head a little bit by scoring 2 goals. And we're going to move on to Barca because I actually watched them against Celta Vigo the past week. Honestly, right, but Iglesias scored a hat-trick in this game, right? And the third goal in the game, both the centre-halves were stood like, so you can imagine the opposition's half of the pitch, like stood halfway up that. And Iglesias was stood on the halfway line.
Yeah,
so they just got the ball, Celta Vigo just got the ball and just punted it long. And he's just stood there on his own 1v1 with the keeper.
It's the most Hansi flick.
Yeah, and some guy said to me on Twitter, he was like, you've got the full Hansi flick experience now. Because they went from, obviously, I think they were losing, then they were drawing 1-1, then they were 3-1 down, and then they were 4-3, and they won the game in the last minute.
Mikel came on though.
Yeah. And the game was played for like 112 minutes. And obviously we're saying this same thing about kind of the squads being depleted and stuff. Yeah, just the fixtures coming thick and fast kind of.
Well, obviously we mentioned Real Madrid just before the Inter game.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, even if it was a final, like, that's taxing in and of itself, but when it's Real Madrid, there's that emotional element.
Yeah.
Players are going to play a lot harder in that game than they would have in another final because they know it's Real Madrid. And then your next game after that is Inter Milan. Do you know who's home in the first leg?
Who's home? Barca are home in the first leg, which is, again, it's that thing of you've got to go to the San Siro second leg. So if you're not winning, it's a very tough thing to turn around.
But I do think if it's 0-0, for example, in that first leg, then there's onus on Inter Milan to play
well.
And to play with the ball.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because, as much as they can play with the ball, we've saw in previous games.
Even in the Bayern game, they were counter-attacking.
Yeah, they were. Generally, I think their ceiling is when they counter-attack. Yeah. But in my head, a draw, for example, in the first leg for Barcelona isn't the worst thing because it means Inter Milan at home kind of have to come out. I don't know. Maybe they don't. Maybe Inter Milan's fans are used to it and they'll have the resolve to kind of sit in. But I think as the game goes on, as the tie goes on, even if it's a neutral game state, once they do try and step out a little bit, Barcelona, let's not forget, have a brilliant threat in transition themselves.
Yeah, huge.
So second leg, I can think, even if it's 0-0, for example, or even if it's close, as Inter try and step out a little bit, you've got Rafinha running in behind. You've got Lamine Yamal playing those passes. You've got Kubasi and the likes playing these direct passes into Lewandowski. And I wouldn't be surprised. I think as bad as it might seem in the moment, a 0-0 draw, for example, for Barcelona in the first leg.
I was just thinking then, we were speaking about fine margins with Arsenal before about how they can score multiple goals in different ways. Inter did score 2 set-piece or 2 corner goals against Bayern Munich after Kane scored. Yeah. So again, we're looking at a team who, and I actually think it sounds weird because we're saying they might be physically depleted. I think Inter could overpower Barca because I'm thinking of Thuram and Martinez up front. I think they're if they get at the centre halves, like I'm saying, I watched the Celta Vigo game and they look really, really exposed on the break. And I look at the way they played against Bayern first leg especially. Even in the second leg, they did sit off. But if they can play directly into Thuram or off Thuram or into Martinez, I think they can cause Barcelona some serious problems. I just think DeMarco as well is incredible on the left wing back. He just gets between both boxes so well, so well. And I'm interested to see because I think the midfield dynamic's going to be really interesting because again, Inter have got more of an ageing core. Whereas Barcelona have kind of got this young, fluid, technical core.
Their system, I think Inzaghi's system, one thing that does work in its favour is it tries to protect the legs of its players sometimes. I know they do these crazy pressing movements and things. But when you have less of the ball, sometimes you can get away with running a bit less. Yeah. It's not always the case with Inzaghi's Inter actually, now that I'm thinking about how they actually implement it. But I can see certain games, for example, they'll manage their legs in phases by just blocking space kind of thing.
I remember the 0-0 at the Etihad when Inter Milan went there. And obviously they played Barcelona at San Siro as well. I look at them games, and especially the one at the Etihad. I think that's how they'll play the most similar when they go to Barca. Yeah. I think they will play on that quality. And I remember Thuram in that game, dragging centre halves all over the pitch. And I just think that if Flick obviously is going to play this ridiculously high pressing style. Like for people who haven't really watched Barcelona, we touched on how good their attacking dynamics
combinations are,
in terms of how they attack. One thing we didn't touch on is just kind of how full on the style is, like heavy metal, in terms of being incredibly high.
He's always been like that. I think one game actually I want to mention about Hansi Flick is when he was at Bayern Munich and they played Barcelona. Obviously they battered Barcelona. But, and I don't know if I'm completely on my own in saying this, but in the first 15-20 minutes, Barcelona had so many big chances against Hansi Flick's Bayern, and they were built out by individual defensive quality. Now after they survived those big chances, then they absolutely destroyed Barcelona. But there are frailties on the biggest stage when you do play so front-footed. And at that point, I was a bit frustrated with Hansi Flick in general. I was like, how can a manager...
How's he getting away with this?
Yeah, he has so much disregard for all of that part of the game. And there's so many big chances that they're conceded that on the face of things, they should be conceding goals. But now I kind of appreciate the fact that look, football is meant to be exciting. If you can do this crazy thing that we've not really seen before, let's watch it and let's celebrate it. But Inter can get at that openness.
I think they'll probably most likely play direct into Thuram and play off Martinez and stuff like that. I think one of the things that's quite interesting to mention is how similar PSG's and Barcelona's second legs were in the quarterfinals, because Dortmund, for people who don't know, tried their hardest to come back and push Barca, and I think Barcelona ended up conceding 4 expected goals in the game, and that's probably the most frail they've looked in a Champions League game. For how free-flowing scoring they are, they do look defensively frail when they do get penned in. And obviously the same happened for PSG in the second leg against Villa, where they looked like it was over, and then couple tetchy moments in the game, and then the game state completely changes. And I don't know, for me, I think Barcelona have got better counter-attacking players, but I don't think they'll be able to use it as much as they want to.
I think they almost need to entice.
They need to get them out. They need to get them out. So I think they taking an early lead would be huge for Barcelona.
Yeah, Barcelona press really well, and their philosophy is to press really intensely. But we've seen teams in Serie A give Inter a tough game when they've said, look, we're not going to press. We'll wait until you come in a half and then we'll press in moments. So whether that's after they take a lead or whether that's in the second leg, that would be a good tactic. But I don't think we'll see it. I think we'll see this full heavy metal
approach.
Which will be exciting.
What do you make of this one then, in terms of predictions or results? So I think this is harder to call than the PSG Arsenal one, simply just because of how different both the teams are. Barcelona could just go there, bang in 4 goals and then it's over, but Inter could also shut up shop 0-0.
It's tough. I would go. The thing is, Lamine Yamal's swaying me from saying Inter. Because even against a very stubborn block, he's got the magic to, when he does that cut inside and he plays it between he plays it around the defence and then in behind. It's crazy.
Actually, we spoke about this off camera just before you say it. Rafinha's got 12 goals and 7 assists in the Champions League. That's the most assists of any player in the Champions League this campaign. And the 2 players that behind him are knocked out the competition. And obviously 12 goals is one behind Guirassy, who plays for Dortmund, who are out. And below him is Kane, who are out. So Rafinha could also finish the season. They're in the Champions League semi-final. And he could finish the campaign top goal scorer, top assister, which would be, as we said, a certain case for the Golden Ball, the Ballon d'Or.
The thing is, bro, I remember the Raheem Sterling campaign where he was topping all these charts. Then they lost the final in the Euros. They didn't win the Champions League. It all kind of failed.
It changes so fast. People can go from saying Ballon d'Or for this player.
It's the same as Mo Salah. As soon as he got knocked out of the 2 competitions. Even though he's still in that conversation, for me, they're not really talking about it.
Not talking about it anymore.
His best form was at the start, and he's kind of slowed down now. So his timing, his trophies, I think Rafinha's certainly in with a shout. I think Lamine Yamal probably performance-wise matches him or probably sometimes betters him.
Yeah.
I prefer Lamine Yamal as an individual player this season. But yeah, with those numbers, if you're topping the goals and assist charts, you're gonna and you win the league, the Champions League, maybe the Copa del Rey, you're gonna win the Ballon d'Or, aren't you?
I'm gonna say Barcelona are gonna go through simply because I just think there's too many goals in the team for them not to go through. I just think there's too much forcing of the issue for Barcelona that I just don't think Inter can kind of, do that. I'm thinking of the team that I watched at Bologna and the team that I watched Barca against Celta Vigo, and it looked like Barcelona just had a little bit more like drive and engine to play at a high pace all the time. And even though when they were losing, they were still going really high, pressing really high, playing really fast. And I was watching Inter and it was all very slow and it looked hard for them to get through the game. So I think Barcelona, I would just fancy them to score more. And I also think they've got better individuals, more importantly, because like we said, Inzaghi's kind of doing an incredible job with the players at his disposal. I'm not saying they've got a bad team, but the forwards are not the same as Barcelona. 100%. Midfield's not the same. So I'd probably say Barcelona, just simply for the fact I think they're fresher. I think they're just more, they're a younger team. They're a far younger team, and I think they're far hungrier than Inter Milan to go again.
I will say Inter though.
Yeah.
The thing is, we're saying different ones, but I think that's nice. But I'll say Inter because I do think obviously the games are coming a bit too close for Barcelona. Inter Milan have really strong transition threat. They're not just a strong defensive side, but they're a very strong transition threat. And Hansi Flick, like, how long can he keep doing this?
I know. But it feels like they never get like
punished for it.
Yeah, they never get punished for it. Like, it feels weird, doesn't it?
But I do think Inter Milan, barring injuries, can grab a goal in that first leg. And if they do that, it gives them more onus to sit in. I don't see Barcelona not high pressing.
Yeah.
If they obviously, who knows what tactics they do implement. But for me, I think the transitional quality paired with the great deep build up that they do have means that they should get chances. And I want Inter to win, but I also do believe logically like they do have a good chance. But it's anyone's game. Barcelona probably the best. I mean, it's statistically the best attacking side with better individual quality
throughout the team.
But systemically, I think I would slightly edge Inter in my prediction.
So you've got Arsenal, Inter in your final. Yeah. I've got PSG, Barca in my final.
Yeah, Arsenal, Inter.
So who you pipping to win a lot?
I want Inter to win because ever since we beat them in the final, I thought for quality they deserved it. Arsenal, Inter, God knows they could be nil.
So for example, if Inter get through and they go to the final and they're still neck and neck with Napoli, do you fancy Inter to still have the freshness over an Arsenal who are not playing for anything? That's the way I would look at that game.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to get up for Champions League finals when there's so much else going on. Yeah. Like if their league is still, I don't know.
What happened with Manchester City? We got knocked out. So the league, I think we got 98 points, Liverpool at 97. We got knocked out of the Champions League, and I think Liverpool was still in the Champions League. But I think if we were in all competitions, we probably wouldn't have won the Premier League.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong, they could have wrapped up the league. You know, they could have completely wrapped it up, been able to rest loads of players and go again.
Losing games.
But yeah, I'm guessing you're gonna say Arsenal?
I would lean towards Arsenal.
In that one-off match, I would. I remember the Inter game against City. You were the worst team in the game throughout the entire game, and I think that they're almost deserving.
Then you think if Gabriel's back, you got Gabriel Saliba.
Havertz could be back for that game,
and then you've still got your corners, you got your free kicks. I would lean towards Arsenal.
Could you really see Arsenal?
But I could. Yeah.
Could you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like I'm trying to get my followers up.
No, because I quite understand the logic, because I just think like for all the technical ability of Barca and PSG, I just look at Champions League and I look at fine margins. They're a knockout tournament football team, like they are, even though they've not won.
I think I'm just scarred by that one game where they had 10 men and City just passed it sideways
just
against
them.
Because I was there on that day,
and
I said, how can this team with 10 men not give us any? We got the scrappy last minute,
John Stones
corner, whatever. But that game, I thought, imagine you've got 11 players now, and they're doing that routine, edge of your box, and you've got a goal or two in the bank. It feels.
I just look at the set pieces. I don't know what it is. I always come back to it, even though they're missing Gabriel at the moment, who's scoring all the set pieces for Arsenal, it feels like. I just think, like, if they get to a final and they get, like, at least 5 corners, do you know what I mean? Like, they win if they get 5 corners.
I said Arsenal are the most mathematically optimised team.
Yeah.
Play on getting...
the efficiency of it,
And Barcelona are a more individually brilliant team, and they don't need that volume of chances, that volume of possession. I think if Barcelona get to the final instead of Inter, I think Barcelona can beat Arsenal.
Yeah, I think Barcelona have got a better chance against Arsenal than Inter.
I agree. So whoever goes through, like, I'm not saying Arsenal are the favourites to win, but against Inter they probably win. I think it's all styles and matchups. So,
well, I've got a Barca PSG final.
Okay.
So
I wish we see that game.
Yeah, that'd be one for the footballing people, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
but, do you know, people always say that the Champions League final is never a good game. I think that would actually be a good game. It'd like force it to be a good game. I would say, I think PSG could win the Champions League. I think they really could. I look at what they've done with the squad over the past few years, and obviously everything we spoke about in the video about reshuffling the squad, getting rid of the superstars, getting more individual quality in who will also work hard for the team. And it's almost like they've built up to this moment really well, and I think winning the Champions League. So, for example, they've built a team of superstars to try and win the Champions League, and then they've gone, right, that's not worked. How else do we do it? We do it by being like a team and having a good coach and playing this style of football.
And they've tapped into like Paris and the French young players.
Like it seems like a lot more of like a squad. Like it seems like a lot more of a team. And I just think it'd be really like good end to the story for PSG itself to obviously win the first Champions League. Enrique's done it before, he knows what it takes, and obviously Dembele would then have a shout for Ballon d'Or maybe.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? So I think there's players there who have like certain redemption arcs in the team. And I just think obviously Marquinhos as well, been there for many years. But yeah, I'd say PSG to win a lot. You're going to say Arsenal.
Yeah, in my bracket, But if Barcelona win, then yeah.
Right, sick. Right, thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy, please don't forget to like, comment and follow the channel, and don't forget to listen on all audio platforms. And we'll be back next week for some more podcasts and analysis. Thank you.